our conversation right here. I'm pretty sure we talked about this last time, but we're going to go ahead and cover it again. The First Continental Congress is going to meet in Philadelphia in September of 1774. 12 of the 13 colonies will meet and decide how to respond to the intolerable acts. Meeting in Philadelphia's Carpenter Hall, delegates are going to propose a lot of different ways to deal with the changes in British policy, particularly this change in salutary neglect. They let us do whatever we want, and now they're imposing all of these taxes upon us. And how are we going to respond to this? The First Continental Congress will include many soon-to-be famous colonial leaders: George Washington, John Adams, Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, John Jay, John Dickinson. And if you look over here at this picture, it's a mural in the U.S. Capitol showing Patrick Henry speaking to the Continental Congress. And that's that First Continental Congress in September of 1774. During the sessions, the delegates are going to discuss a lot of different plans. One of them is going to be the Galloway Plan of the Union. It's very conservative. It still calls for an American government with a president general that was appointed by the king and a council general with veto power over acts of Congress that will affect the colonies. So in other words, if Parliament passed something we didn't like, we would be able to get rid of it if we had the Galloway Plan of the Union. More radical proposals were like the Suffolk Resolve, which calls for a free American legislature. A continental association to boycott British goods and end colonial exports to the British Empire was also proposed. But remember, Britain is so large at this point that us not exporting to them isn't going to hurt them as much as it's going to hurt us. Finally, Congress creates a statement of complaints addressed to King George III, the Declaration of Rights and Grievances, and Congress decides to allow England some time to think over these proposals and to act on them. It is then going to plan to meet again in the spring of 1775 to decide whether we need to take any further action against England. But by the time they meet again in 1775, we're already going to be at war with Great Britain. So let's talk about that. In April of 1775, specifically April 19, 1775, colonies begin to form militias and stockpiling weapons, other supplies in response to what they see as a possible British military action to enforce the Tolerable Acts. In Concord, a few miles outside of Boston, colonists conduct military drills on the village green. Parliament declares Massachusetts in rebellion, and in early 1775, they order military governor Thomas Gage to seize military supplies in Concord. This is getting to be a heated thing, and we don't want these colonists to be armed for what they feel will be an armed rebellion. As Gage assembles his force of 700 men to march towards Concord, a group of patriots, including Paul Revere, Dr. Samuel Prescott, and William Dawes, are going to ride to Lexington to warn the colonial leaders that the British were on the march. And this is what you've probably heard in history as the British are coming, as Paul Revere rides through the countryside. He actually didn't say the British are coming, because at the time the colonists think of themselves largely as still British subjects, British citizens. And so Paul Revere most likely said that the regulars are coming. The regulars are coming in reference to the regular British troops. Arrest warrants had been issued for these colonial assembly leaders such as Samuel Adams and John Hancock, and the British were most certainly looking for these men too. When Gage's forces arrive in Lexington on April 19th, approximately 70 Minutemen, which were Minutemen were your colonial militia members that were ready in a minute's notice to fight, were on the village green and ready for a battle. After a verbal confrontation between the British soldiers, the Minutemen begin to withdraw, and someone fired a shot, which leads to an exchange of gunfire between the British and the Minutemen, leaving 8 colonists dead. This is eerily similar to what happened at the Boston Massacre, except at the Boston Massacre, we know that it was a British soldier that fired. Here at Lexington, we don't know who fires this famous shot that becomes known as the shot heard around the world. It could have been a colonist. It could have been a British officer. Neither one of them are going to ever in history take credit for it. But regardless, a shot was fired. It leads to shots fired on both sides. 8 colonists are dead. Word of this conflict at Lexington spreads, and Minutemen are going to arrive at Concord to help resist the British. After a fight at Concord's North Bridge, the British are going to retreat to Boston. On the way back to Boston, the colonial militia are going to fire on the British troops. And by the time they reached Boston, 273 British soldiers have been killed, compared to fewer than 100 colonists. War has now begun. The colonists are going to use a type of guerrilla warfare, hiding behind the trees and shooting from under cover to attack the British on the way back to Boston. And the British see this as simply savage behavior and reprehensible behavior on part of the colonists. I want to look at the last two questions here, and I want you to answer these in your notes. What was the purpose of the First Continental Congress? Who were some of the delegates? Why did the British march on Lexington and Concord, and what happened at these two sites? Okay, we're going to end right there for today. I do have quite a bit more to add to this. I'm hoping to get that video posted over the weekend and give you a couple of days to look at that. There's a lot of more information that we need, so be looking for that and be ready to discuss that next week in class. Y'all have a great weekend.